my life can be better if I relocate and all those
And it's okay to relocate, but you're still going to travel and you're going to be faced with the green passport. So
Yeah.
what do you do when you're out there? Everyone is running to AI, ChatGPT to construct even little paragraphs. So that's always been my attitude. It's really about the company and the brands and the customers involved.
Hello and welcome to the Good News Nigeria podcast. My name is Desmond Eberkunwe. On today's episode, we are genuinely speaking to a marketing leader. And I know you'd enjoy this episode. Thank you so much for joining us on the Good News Nigeria podcast. We've wanted to have you for like months. You had months to get.
Not really. I think you were hard to get. Thank you.
So we're very excited to be having this conversation because you've had a very huge career. But the very first question I'd like to ask would be around the ambitions from people from your generation and ours. You've had a career that spanned over 30 years. But I remember growing up and my dad always reminded me of how he built his first house before he was 27 and was married before then. And all of the many ambitions that if you chased maybe an icon and you started working with a top firm, you had a trajectory that you start making certain amounts and then your life is set for life. But for us now, it's different. So a lot of us are like, if you don't have your own house at 30, it's okay. But then I try and do something. The benchmark has now moved softly to like 40. So what do you think has caused these changes in their ambitions or what is possible for these two generations when it was popular for people in their 20s to maybe buy their first Peugeot? Why now, if you have a car, you are profiled in society as doing something else?
No, so interestingly, thanks for the question. I think it's an interesting question. I have a slightly different point of view. All right, I typically would say it on the light notes of the joke when people say your generation different from our generation. And I say lightly, but also half seriously, that as long as we're all still alive, we're still in the same generation. So the distinction between generations, I think that, yes, there may be different behavioral attitudes, but I think that a lot of it has to do with individuals and the perspectives of individuals. So I accept that, yes, depending on which generation a person was born to. But as you proceed with life, things then evolve and change. So as you rightly say, perhaps the older generation were keener around building houses, getting cars early enough because it was a sign of what you will, a measure of stability. Perhaps things were not as competitive as they are today, but there was competition, but perhaps less competitive. But even within the older generation, it differed from person to person. I didn't build or buy a house in my 20s. Indeed, it was until I turned about 40. Right? And there are still some people my age who haven't yet built their own houses or bought their own homes. So I think that it's a bit perhaps too generic to speak about generations and what happens, because I think people are also running their own individual races. But for the older generation, things were a bit less competitive, and therefore access to either loans to buy the houses or build the houses or cars came a bit more readily than in today's generation. So I accept that there's that distinction that has made things a bit more challenging for today's generation, if you will use that phrase. But it doesn't mean that ambitions are necessarily different. I think that from generation to generation, people have been ambitious, wanting to achieve. And a lot of the aspirations are tied to, in many cases, material things such as houses, cars, and the likes. I have an uncle who bought a car when he was doing his youth service. And when he bought the car and came to see his brother, my father, queried him that how could you have bought a car so early as a young person. So I think a lot of it's about aspirations and differs from one generation to another generation. Ambitions remain the same, but the ease might be a bit difficult.
I ask this because, aside even the conversations that I had with as a growing boy with my father,
Yes.
I've been in rooms where an older millennial or even somebody from the older generation would always query and say, the younger people are lazy. I didn't do this in my time. Oh, do you know when I started this business and all of that? So they would always reference it and tag the generation in the mid 90s down as lazier, as less ambitious, or who. And these people would tag it as smart work, but then the older generation tag it as lazy work. So in your journey, you've not noticed this distinctions between how the ambitions of these two generations and how the older generation sees work and applies work, and how these generation, though disruptive, is approaching work.
So there is a difference. And so it's different from the issues around ambitions and what people acquire, which I think a lot of it has to do with personal preferences. I think the priorities in the younger generation are different. I spoke earlier on about the issues around stability. So the older generation wanted some measure of stability, to get married, have kids, and that was great. And also understand that the impact of globalization was less on the older generation, if you will, the baby boomers, the Generation X. It started to impact a lot more on millennials and Gen Zs. And what do I mean by that? Although the older generation also did travel, but to experience the world, they had to travel mostly physically. Now, in today's generation, you don't have to travel physically to experience the world. So you could argue that there's a lot more general exposure to what's happening across the world to this generation. And therefore, the aspirations are a bit different. This generation is perhaps better exposed on a general basis, and therefore their standards and expectations are different. And so even if you don't have a house, the fact that you're living well, so to speak, is what the younger generation is looking for. And therefore, with the advent of technology, the younger generation is one that is seeking convenience, they're seeking speed, ease. And I think that's why the older generation will perhaps talk about them being a bit lazy. I also speak to the fact that there's at times what I call a microwave mentality. You just want things to happen quickly, right? So the older generation might tend to call that laziness because there was a bit more tedium for the older generation in terms of achieving things. So I would not necessarily call it lazy, but I would call it a desire to make it very quickly and not necessarily through a lot of tedium is where the distinction between the older generation and the younger generation.
Okay, so it's clear. I agree. So my very next question would now still be around your personal journey and how you. I know you studied biochemistry.
Yes, I did have a master's in biochemistry.
And then you have a robust career in marketing. So was it popular to move from, first, why biochemistry? And then why move to an industry that somebody once called marketing the rabble-rousing
well, they're not right,
industry.
but
So like,
no, they're not
a lot
right.
of dances and a lot of
that's
thinking.
that's the error. It's not marketing is definitely not that. There's a lot more to marketing, but I'll come to that, I'm sure.
Why the decision to move from that, from biochemistry that almost had a pathway that is stable, something you've referenced, to marketing that.
There's a bit of story around that because even before I studied biochemistry, I was in medical school. So I was studying to be a medical doctor.
What happened?
All right. So I was in medical school, 1 year pre-med and 2 years in medical school. But as I began my medical studies. In fact, before I started my medical studies, right from my O levels, A levels, even though I was, as they say, an all-round brilliant student, I studied both the sciences and the arts. But I then realized, and some of my close friends realized, that I was stronger in the arts. But I'd already begun this journey to become a medical doctor. So at A levels, I studied physics, chemistry, and biology, got into university. But as I continued that journey, I realized that this really wasn't what my life's purpose, destiny was about, because I was much stronger in the arts. But I'd already begun the journey. So along the journey, I then dropped out of medical school. And for me, it was an escape from Alcatraz, an escape from what I called a concentration camp. I was free, thank God I'm free at last when I left medical
How
school.
did your family take that?
That's a longer story on its own.
Because
not for public consumption.
you know me, I'm already judging you. I'm like, what?
So it was a very difficult, challenging period. Yes, tensions, family at home were high, but thankfully we were able to navigate that season. And so I was left with options of what to study. I actually wanted to study the arts. Indeed, I was asking to go start afresh to study English because my interests were in the arts, creative arts. But I couldn't pivot immediately to study English. It would have meant that I started all over again to go via JAM. That would have meant another 2 years of loss in time. That would have then meant 5 years of loss. And I thought that, of course, my parents and my advisors thought that wasn't reasonable. And even though initially I was adamant, I also realized, I came to my senses and realized I really wasn't sensible. So the issue was, what else could I study that would not make me lose additional years? And I had options of studying either biochemistry or microbiology since I'd been in medical school. I decided to go with biochemistry because I'd already done that in part of my medical studies. So it was really just just study for a degree. But then I started the degree, and I decided that, you know what, why don't you just focus and strive to do well at it? And with that conscious decision, I did extremely well and graduated top of the class in biochemistry for my first degree. And as a result of that, after youth corps, everybody around me, including my lecturers in the university, thought, look, why don't you come back and do your postgraduate studies? Mm-hmm. And the advice really was around prepare to do a PhD. But I said, look, let me start with a master's. And the reason why I wanted to start with a master's was I wanted to be sure that I wasn't going to get entrapped again. Again, this was for me reminding myself that, look, you're actually on a path where you really are strongest is around the creative arts. So I decided to do the master's in 1 year. Again, graduated top of the class. And so that, again, put a bit of pressure about, okay, so why did you start your PhD? So I got the PhD form. And then after a week of getting the form, I decided, no, don't go this path. All right, so I did not proceed with my PhD and began to look for a job. And what I really was interested in was to get a job as a copywriter. And this begins to speak to your question directly. I started to apply for jobs in advertising agencies as a copywriter. But I realized that Nigeria at that time was not as evolved as and exposed, and where people were more open at the time. So I'm talking about 36 years ago. And I would write letters of application by hand, no computers, or type by hand, write by hand. And I'll say application as a copywriter. And my first 1 or 2 paragraphs will say, I realize and recognize that my degrees in science may appear to be a limitation. However, I appeal that you just invite me for an interview for us to have a conversation. I was confident that all that they needed to do was invite me, have a conversation, and I will prove that I had the required skills and attitudes as a copywriter, because I was already writing. I had written short stories, I had written poems. But Nigeria of that time didn't give me a chance. So no one responded. Not one advertising agency responded. So I kept the search on. applying for all kinds of jobs, all kinds. But I also thought I might end up rather as a technical person in the factory. And look, I was open to anything. I just wanted a job. In the process of looking for the job, I also applied as a management trainee in different companies. One of those companies, after 1,000 of us wrote aptitude tests, we got narrowed, shortlisted to 100, and then to a final 17. And when we went to attend the interviews in that company, the head of HR came to us and says, "Oh, by the way, we need to inform all of you that you're all being considered for sales and marketing jobs." And apparently something changed in my face, which he misread. Because he then said, yes, out of all the 17, singled me out and said, yes, Omoyele. And I was impressed that he remembered my name. You're probably surprised that with all your science degrees that will be considered for a technical role or factory role, but that we've seen you through all the stages of interview and we think you will do well in sales and marketing. Now, I say he misread what my face projected, was because what my face was projecting was what was coming out of my spirit. Praise God. That, oh, wow, somebody has seen the light. Right? And so it goes. But she said, I don't know anything about marketing. I didn't know anything about marketing at the time. So I turned to the person next to me, a fellow candidate, to ask him, what is marketing? Right? Because I had no idea. Anyway, go up to the interview to meet with the sales and marketing director. And as part of his questions, he asked me, he said, have you been told you're being considered for sales and marketing job? I said, yes, sir. So what do you know about marketing? I said, nothing, sir. And you don't mind? I don't mind, sir. I will learn. As far as I was concerned, marketing was not the sciences. And so I was open to it and got the job. And here we are today. So it began a journey in marketing. That company for which I am eternally grateful was Cadbury.
Oh, that's exciting because, and so marketing to you wasn't like what you really wanted.
I was not looking for marketing. I did not know what marketing was about, but it was not a science course. And I thought, the little I knew about it, I thought, wow, okay, it's along something close to the creative arts, communication that I was thinking about.
So how did you find love and skill in marketing?
So the first thing was having gotten the job of marketing, understood what marketing was to an extent, and began to learn on the job. So I learned on the job. As I said, my response to the sales and marketing director was I was going to learn. So I opened up my mind and I learned everything that I could learn, both on the job and by reading. I had a colleague, we started together as trainees, who already had a sense about what marketing was, but it got into his head and he thought he already knew it more than everybody else. He didn't last 2 years in the company because he didn't do well. So I learned to have an open mind and I learned as much as possible. So lots of reading, taking a lot of courses, and on-the-job training is what helped me.
So now, speaking about marketing, looking at your journey, what has been the campaign that you are most proud of? Your favorite campaign through your journey?
It's difficult to say which one is the most favorite campaign because I've been involved in many campaigns. One that comes to mind, however, is the relaunch of Bonvita in the year 2000, moving Bonvita from the brown and cream packaging that it had been in for 40 years and transforming it into purple and running a repositioning campaign that also changed the theme from vitality to nourishment. So the total overhaul of the brand in terms of the packaging, look and feel, packaging formats, the thematic advertising is one that, yes, I will definitely single out because it transformed the brand equity, and also the performance in the marketplace.
Me pretending to know that Bonvita was previously brown.
Exactly, tells you what your age is.
So that is amazing. So no other one.
I mean, there are many, there are loads. I think that I would also single out even though this was not necessarily in terms of advertising, but developing a new product from scratch, a product that didn't exist when the Nigerian economy was in dire straits and businesses were losing sales revenue by half, and getting a thought about a product that could fill a gap. And from the point that I had that thought and wrote a position paper with the company, and the company accepted, and within 6 weeks, we launched that product into the market. And that product became the number 3 product after Bonvita and Milo in the Nigerian market. That brand was called Richoco. And that for me was also notable.
So now seeing the impact of your work on everyday Nigerians,
Yes.
because does it give you, how does that feel? Does it give like a godlike feel and on how you approach every brand you touch? Because I can almost see the impact.
Yes.
Hearing, because I do not remember Bonvita to have another color branding, and as well as the other brands. So you get to a point that you almost feel like I can make or break any company.
Okay, well, I think anybody who begins to have a demigod attitude ultimately will run into trouble. All right, so I don't have that. But there is a gratifying feeling that you've done something that has influenced consumer or people behavior in the marketplace. And as a result of what you have done, either in terms of the product you've launched or campaigns you've run, it has positively impacted upon the companies that you work with, the brands that you worked on. So I think there's a sense of gratification that comes with that. Or seeing someone buy a brand because of an advert that you have produced. And as I'm speaking, I recall once in the apartment that I stayed in, somewhere in Lagos, a suburban area in Lagos. And late in the evening, I just hear a child on the streets, shouting on the streets and saying, every child deserves Bonvita. And that was a payoff of the brand. And so it was gratifying that everyday people can relate in that sense. So yes, there's a sense of gratification that comes.
Okay. So for the longest time, so people watching this will be shocked too, because they never really tie the work to, or the results of the work to, it's tied to the brand, but then it's not tied to the people who necessarily create it.
Yeah.
So through the years, how are you able to now balance the joys or the rewards of the work that you've created with doing the work over the years? So what I mean is, like, you've done all of these work, but you are seeing people, the child on the streets, resonating with these work. But then the people on the same street might not necessarily know that you're involved with that.
And that's fine. And that's fine. Because really what matters when you're doing the work is about the brands.
Okay.
And not you as a brand manager.
Okay.
The joy that you have, that you have contributed to somebody's pleasure, and also the performance of the company, which, by the way, the company pays you for doing your job, I think is good, right? And then, yes, if people get to know at the end of the day that there are people behind it, that's extra. But we must be careful as brand managers or marketing people to want to project ourselves over and above the brand or the company. So that's always been my attitude. It's really about the company and the brands and the customers involved, and less to do with you as the person behind it. I think that anyone who seeks to put themselves ahead of the brand, the consumer, or the company will be running a risk on the medium to long term.
Merging a lot of these campaigns, I remember growing up, and I remember even up till date, I remember a lot of the campaigns that were launched back in the day for different brands.
Yeah.
But then some people would say that some of these copies now do not necessarily stick as compared to some of those timeless
Yeah.
brands. Do you
Yeah.
agree?
To an extent, yes. Not completely. I think there are still memorable campaigns today that are as strong as previous years. I think that if it appears that previous years' campaigns are more memorable than today, I think the critical thing is about the depth of strategic thinking and quality of consumer insights. I think that today there's a lot of rush to get into market, a lot of rush to quickly make it, and therefore the depth is slightly lacking. And I think that's just an area that needs to be addressed. Having said that, there are some memorable campaigns. I think the advent of social media has also made things a bit more, I don't use the word lax, but then has also affected depth. And there just needs to be a bit more depth of thinking and consumer insights that drives these campaigns.
So one of the brands you've handled is Airtel, and I would say that they've been consistent till date because I still remember one of their campaigns, most recent campaigns is the chief of data or something like that.
Yes, that's a recent campaign. Yes.
And it's the most recent, and it sticks. So, what do you think was the recipe that you used to create those timeless?
Okay. So first of all, for full disclosure, I never worked with Airtel as a brand.
Okay.
I did work with the company when it was called Zane.
Okay. Zane.
All right. All right. And you know that the company has gone through
A lot of
transitions. I always tell it as a half joke that I was recruited by Celtel, but by the time I resumed, Celtel had become Zane. Zane then became Airtel thereafter. But the thing about the company is that it has always been a strong marketing-led company, even right from when it first launched into Nigeria as Equinet. And I believe that that's what has led to the consistency in terms of, despite all the transitions, in terms of marketing being guided by consumer insight. And I think that's very important for any brand or company to be guided by consumer insight.
What are your thoughts on mentorship?
Mentorship is important. I believe that it's important for people with other younger people or people with lesser experience to be guided by those who have traveled the road ahead of them. So it's important. But I also think there's a benefit for both the mentor and the mentee. And it speaks again to what you were talking about different generations. I believe that we have things to learn from one another. And so even if one person is the designated mentor and is guiding the mentee, the younger one, the mentor can also learn from the mentee. So you have today what is called reverse mentorship. So there has to be some mutual benefits to both. It shouldn't be just about the mentee learning and taking from the mentor. The mentee should also be able to offer value to the mentor, either in terms of also sharing their own experiences and what they're learning, which the mentor can learn from, or supporting the mentor on some of the mentor's initiatives. But I think mentorship is important.
All right, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. So, still speaking about mentorship,
Yes.
you're a member of a faculty at a university.
Yes, Pan Atlantic University.
We cannot endorse them.
Oh, you don't endorse them, right?
I'm joking. One of my favorite, by far, one of my favorite places.
All right.
What are your thoughts about mentorship and building the next generation of marketing leaders? Still speaking about through the academic route.
That's important. And I'm a firm believer in the town meets gown philosophy, in the sense that theory is important to ground anyone, since we're talking about marketing, especially in marketing. But it's also important that the theory is put into practical terms. And so as the students are learning the theory, being grounded in the theory of marketing principles, that they also see how those principles apply in real life. And that's what I believe mentorship, especially within the academic environment, helps. And that's one of the main reasons why I teach at the university and other academies in terms of reaching town with gown, so to speak.
So, speaking about leadership now, so how can we build more resilient leaders for now thinking about businesses now? How do you think we can build strong businesses, and how do we raise these leaders that can support and align with these businesses?
So first of all, there must be clarity in vision and mission of the business. One of the things that I learned early in my career, and I heard this from Dr. Christopher Collady, an elder statesman, corporate, as you will, visionary, is that the primary purpose of any business should be to stay in business. And what does it mean to stay in business? You have clarity of vision and mission, but you must also know your why. Why are you in that business? Someone may say, and I know that when I've asked that question, that what's the primary purpose of business, they say it's to make money. But not necessarily. Making money is the means to an end. You're in business because you've identified a need or want in the marketplace, and you're providing a solution. You're providing value. And when you provide value to the customer, you get value in return in terms of the money. And therefore, for you to stay in business, you must keep on providing value to the customer. So for a business to be sustainable, to be resilient, it must have the customer at the heart of its business, understand the needs and the wants, the motivations of the customer, and seek to meet at the minimum those expectations. If not, indeed, you are striving to exceed those expectations. So resilience is built around that. But obviously, you must also understand basic business principles after customer service around profit and loss, understand balance sheet statements and the things that can affect your balance sheets, drive issues around cash flow. But I think also having values is really important. Values such as excellence, integrity, are things that can also help businesses be sustainable and be resilient. I think any business that is not driven by integrity or excellence will not last into the long future. Now, what do you do to therefore transfer these learnings to business people? I believe it's about on-the-job training. It's about being exposed to various learnings, both global and local. Mentorship that we've spoken already about, and generally just showing positive examples, role models to build those capacities, those competencies, and also the character that's required to sustain those businesses in the long run.
So one of the people I considered to be a mentor a few weeks ago was speaking about how being a leader tests you. And even sometimes you are worried about people misplacing what your truest intentions were when you take certain decisions, especially as it regards people's careers, lives, and even when you, for example, take the tough decisions of maybe firing them or letting them go. So how do you think business leaders can navigate these conversations around the tough decisions that are required for the business to keep going, and the bonds that every company tries to create, that family bond that they try to create?
Yeah, not all companies, but some companies.
Some companies try to create with the staff member and the organization.
There's a place of values that I've spoken to earlier on. And I think one of the critical values that every company and every leader will need to strive to have is being fair, being equitable. Once a leader has chosen to be fair, and operate with integrity, then it becomes easier because you're guided by values that you're known for, you're guided by fairness, and once you take decisions based on those values and being fair, it then becomes easier when you have to take some tough decisions that impact upon the careers and indeed lives of people. And the fact that you're trying to create a family atmosphere doesn't mean that you cannot be firm and fair. Even within our blood families, you take decisions. Decisions. But as you take those decisions, you want to be sure that you are fair. Mm-hmm. I've had cause to let people go from their jobs. In doing so, you want to do it with consideration, with kindness.
What does that look
also,
like?
Not always easy.
Would you be like, here's a car as you go?
Nothing like that. But you try and provide the context for why you are having to take that decision. If it is a consequence of poor performance, and you let the person know that this is the reason why the person is being let go, and you itemize, because I think we also are leaders. We also should put ourselves in a position to help people, to point out areas of opportunity to growth or where they need to correct themselves. And so I will share gently, this is the reasons. In cases where it doesn't have to do with poor performance, maybe the business is restructuring, you also provide the reasons why. And in such a case, you try and provide a soft landing. So even for those with poor performance, you try and also provide a soft landing. That it's not about them as people, but it just has to do with performance or the business context.
What if they do not get it? And does it bother you that maybe you communicate all of these? Say, for example, you cite examples of poor performance, or maybe you link it to the business evolving, and the person doesn't still get it, and it causes a strain in the relationship.
Yes.
Does it matter to you?
It matters, but then the impact is lessened by me being clear in my conscience that I've striven to be fair. And once you have a clear conscience, that makes it easier to navigate the relationship. And even if the person is still hurt by the decision, you hope that as you continue to engage the person, that ultimately the person will come around to understand why, painful as it might have been at that point in time.
Okay. I think this would be helpful to a number of people who are aligned to me. So now let's move to branding, which is something that you have a lot of knowledge with and you've spoken about. How do you think, because Nigeria we want to put it in the Nigerian context now.
Yes.
Nigeria has an image in the global eye.
And also internally.
Yes. So how do you think we can better brand the Nigerian image? Because even someone was trying to break a world record a few weeks
recently, as well.
A few weeks ago about and she was trying to connect different parts of the world. But then was met with the problem of the Nigerian passport.
Yes.
So how do we better the Nigerian image and the branding of the Nigerian person, who most of the time is excellent?
So the first thing we have to do is internal branding. Yes, definitely we have to fix the issues that we have as a country. But I always say that even the strongest brands in the world, even the consumer goods brands, they're not 101% perfect. There are always going to be issues and defects. What they do, however, and even the nations of the world, the nations that we pride and we think are the best nations, have their own issues, right, which they constantly are trying to fix. So yes, we need to fix our issues as Nigerians. But I think that as Nigerians, we owe ourselves to speak more positively about the Nigerian brand. And that's not to say that we are not acknowledging that we have issues. But we need to say, if we're going to build a strong brand, then as Nigerians, at every level, whether in government or not in government, to speak more positively about the Nigerian brand. So it starts, I think, from us. And then for the external, we need to be projecting our strengths much more than we are doing. We tend to project our negatives even on the global stage. And we need to stop that as Nigerians, again, whether in government or outside of government. You don't expect foreigners to speak positively about your brand if you, the brand owners, are speaking negatively. So to fix the Nigerian brand and imagery, each of us as Nigerians need to be projecting it positively. Understand that our behavior as well on the global stage influences the perceptions that we have. But ultimately, it's about projecting the strengths and the good of us. We are excellent people. We are great in our arts, our culture, our music, indeed our sports, our academia. We are great. So let's project those positives while we fix the negative parts of Nigeria.
So I also think that would come from the awareness of knowing these strengths, because a lot of us are unaware of our strength and the power that we carry and possess as Nigerians. So you're projecting, my life can be better if I relocate and all those.
And it's okay to relocate, but you're still going to travel and you're going to be faced with the green passport. So what do you do when you're out there? I've had the opportunity to live and work outside of Nigeria. And I was initially faced with those negative perceptions. Now, the issue for me is not to fight it. The issue for me is to, one, show this is the uniqueness that we have as Nigerians. And one of the things I used to say to them, they'll say, oh, you're not your typical Nigerian. I said, no, you got it wrong. I'm your average Nigerian. What the little you know about Nigeria is just a perception. This is who we are. And then give examples of many Nigerians doing great things on the global stage.
I was going through your Instagram one time, and I met one of the conversations that I personally had faced, which is, so there's a lot of conversations about artificial intelligence now coming up with brands and how work is approached. And I made an application last year, and the feedback that came back was that it was AI assisted.
Yes.
And it broke my heart because I had written every single thing from my heart.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, this was maybe because I used a lot of being
and because they don't understand that Nigerians will speak really good English.
I was very disappointed. So, but now, how do you think we can? Because I also do think that the future is becoming very aligned with artificial intelligence, and it will be weird to not jump on the bandwagon to see how we can embrace work that is good and human, and also see how we can use artificial intelligence to improve our work. So what is your thoughts on that, and how do we navigate the fears that people have around artificial intelligence taking over work? And yes.
So it's a double-edged sword, and it's about how do we utilize artificial intelligence for good. The downside is that increasingly people are not thinking enough for themselves. Everyone is running to AI, ChatGPT, to construct even little paragraphs. So that's the downside, and speaks to the experience that you talked about. So my approach to this is AI is supposed to assist and not replace. So how do we not forget that we have the human capacity? And by the way, it's human capacity that has created artificial intelligence. So let's not forget that. So how do we still maintain that natural capacity to think and utilize AI to refine and maybe help with efficiency? Would AI replace some jobs? Yes, but it won't be the first time that robots and machines are replacing human beings. When you have a factory, a manufacturing plant that has automation, that's part of replacing some human beings that could have done that instead of the manual process. So that challenge is not new to the world. It's not new to human race. What we need to do is prepare ourselves in anticipation of some of those challenges and position ourselves with new learnings that ensure that the impact of utilizing AI is less on the human race.
How do you embrace in your organization or your work? Have you found yourself embracing these tools?
Yes. So
Awesome.
we use it to refine our copywriting, use it to improve the quality of art direction, use it to improve the quality of proposals that we write. But we are conscious of the fact that it's not supposed to replace our human thinking, also our understanding of the cultural nuances and context. AI is unlikely to fully understand the depth of being a Nigerian, living in Nigeria, and positioning a brand that is for Nigerians. It can help us with intriguing thoughts, but we need to refine those, what we get in from AI. And at the end of the day, AI is also garbage in, garbage out. It's the quality of the prompts that we give that also will help with the feedback that we get.
Okay, with your experience as Nitro 121, what trends do you see shaping the future of Nigeria?
Future of Nigeria.
Nigeria branding in Nigeria.
Branding Nigeria.
Yeah.
We've spoken already to artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
That's definitely going to have an impact. I think also the cultural context and nuances in Nigeria. Increasingly, consumers are looking for having a connection, cultural context. When I use the word culture, I'm not talking about tradition in that sense. I'm talking about the way of life, the way of behavior. So brands need to connect even more strongly to the cultural context and the consumer insights, back to what I said earlier on. Brands also need to realize the trend is of issues of humanization of brands. Move away from just selling brands, but relating with the consumer. We're in the age of co-creation where consumers are relating with brands and own those brands actually. Okay, so humanization of brands, let them feel connected to the brands. And also we're in the age of personalization where consumers want you to treat them as one of the 200 plus million people we have, not just a statistic, but treat me as a person of note of personal importance. Those are some of the trends that I think will impact branding in the years to come.
How do you think brands that faced a lot of backlash can be revived? That now surrounding around conversations around maybe cancel culture can be revived. Do you think that brands should be more progressive, and when the audience, for example, says, "Oh, you must support this," or "You must be part of this trend," and then maybe they alienate themselves or do not have any voice, and then the people decide that, "Oh, we're going to blacklist them or remove hands from this business." How do you navigate that?
It's important for brands to have a clarity of vision and mission, as I said earlier on, and your core values. If your vision, your mission, your core values don't align to what the crowd is pushing for, then you should be strong as a brand to stand for it. And also clarify why. You have a choice to either keep quiet or clarify why you're not.
But no,
in
people on
support.
Twitter don't want you to keep quiet.
So if you choose to respond, and the truth of the matter is, even on Twitter, I think for every word that you say, you get yourself into more trouble. So at times, not all the time, silence might be the best approach. And so if silence is the best approach, what I've also realized, and hopefully Twitter doesn't come after me for this, what I feel a lot of times is the cancel culture is temporary. So if you are, as a brand, able to ride that period, then it might be in your interest not to engage. But if it has to do with something that you have done as a brand, remember we're talking about you're being attacked for not doing something. But if it happens to be something you have done, then you may need to engage to provide context of why you have done that.
Okay. So what do you think, because every person who's built a business, who's had a great career, gets to a point that, they're now maybe focused. I was listening to a Stephanie Busari interview, who had pivoted from her time at CNN. She had a really huge career. She had won all the different Emmys.
Yeah.
But then she now says she wants her legacy to be the women whose stories she's able to capture now that she's pivoted from her role as a journalist. So for you, what would you say you would want your legacy to be, and what do you think your legacy is?
I don't know what I'm not sure. Actually, I think it's a challenging question that you ask. I could be generic and say that a legacy is that I helped people to grow, right? And in fulfilling that, I teach, I write. So perhaps I could say that legacy is I'm helping people to grow. The platforms and the means through which I do that are varied. But if you want to just narrow it, you could say that helping people to grow and fulfill their potential.
In your personal understanding of what legacy is, would you say that it has to be in the tangibles, or it must be in does the number of, or the skill of people whose lives are touched matter?
So for me, legacy is not necessarily in what you call tangibles. And when I say tangibles, I'm talking of material things. No, it is really in terms of the number of people that can say that as a result of contact, interaction with me, there was a positive difference in their lives. It could be just a 1 minute of interaction that made a difference. That maybe said, oh, wow, I never thought of this way. And therefore, they put in place certain actions that changed their lives for good. That, for me, would be what legacy is about. Someone once said to me, when I was leaving a country, I had worked for a few years, and said that, look, I've listened to everybody, what they've said, but I think that Lampe's greatest legacy here is the people. And I thought that was profound because I had not thought of it in that regards.
Okay. So, final question is, now reflecting on your career and the work you've done and the work you continue to do, what are you most proud of?
It's difficult to say what most proud
taking that
of.
decision,
Yes.
even taking that singular decision of moving from medical school to now chasing biochemistry and having even sending those letters. What are you most proud of?
Everywhere I've been and everybody I've interacted with, I've tried to make a positive difference to each person. So if you want to say what am I most proud of, it will be about the difference that I hope, or I am also told at times, that I've made in the lives of people. I think that will be something that I can say. I don't like to use the word proud of, but something that I feel gratified about.
I have a follow-up question, but then I feel like that would be a good point to also end.
Ask it. It doesn't have to be recorded.
So the question would be, the lives that you've touched, because now I hear you're able to quantify it to people, but does it matter that if these people that you have these people, you know these people that you've touched in their lives, but does it matter if they remember or if they know that you've changed their lives? or the extent of at which you achieve?
Truth. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's nice to get the same feedback at times, and many times I'm so pleasantly surprised when I get the feedback. But the primary purpose is not to know or hear about it, because I just do it. Right now, if I get to hear or know about it, it's a plus, which just basically encourages me to keep at it. Yeah. I think that's what it does. It's less to do to massage, and I say this with every sincerity. It's not to massage ego or anything like that. It's just a source of encouragement to say, okay, well, it's actually worth it after all.
All right, we do believe in gratitude, and we're grateful that you joined us. And we'd like to give you a gift courtesy of one of our partners, and we'd like to say thank you for being a part of the Good News Niger podcast.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. This has been a beautiful episode speaking to the General, Lampe Omoyele, who's had a very big career in marketing. He's chased his ambition. From this episode, you can see that the payoff when you genuinely chase your ambitions. And I'm grateful that we had this conversation. To enjoy more of this type of conversations, please visit our website at thegoodnewsnigerpodcast.com. And of course, do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Good News Niger Podcast. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, everywhere at the Good News Niger Podcast. My name is Desmond Ebwe. See you on the next episode.